It is equivalent to a very religious church-going guy today telling a church, standing up here and telling the church, I was raised in church. I said the sinner's prayer when I was 9 years old. My mom and dad sent me to Christian school, and I went on to seminary, and I was highly educated. In fact, I eventually became a pastor. I kept all the rules, and everyone, including myself, assumed that I was saved. But I wasn't. That's the punch. He's standing in front of these Jewish people. Everything that he's just shared, they agree with, they affirm, and they're like, this is great. He says, and I was just where you all were at. And what he means by that is that punch. Lost. You get it. I'm not sure how old Paul was when Christ saved him on the road to Damascus, but I'm certain that Paul and everyone that knew him were thoroughly convinced that he was the apple of God's eye. This was the common ground Paul shared with the Jews of Jerusalem. Self-assured in their own righteousness, convinced that by birth and by religious observance that they were okay with God. And this self-deception is alive and well right here in Farmington, New Mexico this morning. Some of you right now assume that you're saved because you believe, one, God exists, I go to church, I do religious things. You know, I tithe, I pray, I read my Bible every now and then. I'll endure an hour of this guy's preaching. You know, I sing a song or two. Those are religious things. Those got to count for something. And, you know, sometimes I don't lie, and sometimes I don't steal from work, and I don't always cheat on my wife. I don't do this, I don't do that, and I must be okay with God. Suddenly, we see a sinner surrendered to Christ, a man in submission to the authority of God. Moments before, Paul was walking on his own 2 feet, his eyes set on Damascus, pursuing God on his own terms, and in one blinding instance, that same man was rendered blind, and on bended knee, he professed Christ as his Lord and his Savior. And you'll notice he didn't provide an elaborate theological explanation of how he was saved. He didn't go through the 5 points of Calvinism. He didn't do any of that type of stuff. There was no altar call. There was no sinner's prayer that we're all so just enamored with and assume that has to be, you know, the way you do it. He was just a man broken before God, broken before Christ, the risen Lord. And his profession of faith was summed up in that question: what shall I do, Lord?